Good evening, everyone who is on the call already. I just wanted to let you guys know that we're going to be starting in just a few minutes. I know everyone is a bit busy getting to these meetings after work and trying to get dinner. So we're just going to give everyone just a few more minutes to come in. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we have everyone who signed up, but if anyone's joining late, they can join in. I apologize as well. We are having a little bit of technology difficulties over here, so it will not be live streamed to YouTube. However, we will get it posted within the next couple of days to our website in place of doing it on YouTube. So look out for that. Again, I do apologize. All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. for this public information meeting. It's on our type 2 noise analysis that we did statewide. And with us today presenting is our consultant team. So just for some welcomes and introductions, here's the project team. I just want to highlight as well, these are the key members that you'll be hearing from today. However, there were several other team members that were very key in the success of this analysis, but are not mentioned here. So thank you to everyone who's worked on this project with us. So from the department, we have Christine Zanellis, the assistant director. Then we have myself, Anna LaRose. I'm a transportation planner. And from our consultant team, we have Eric Moss, who is the vice president and the environmental engineer with Fuss & O'Neill. Eric leads the Fuss & O'Neill task order environmental planning contract with the department and was the overall project manager for the type 2 noise analysis. Fuss & O'Neill partnered with the firm Harris Miller and Hansen to provide highway noise analysis expertise for this project. HMMH has developed type 2 noise programs for other state DOTs in the Northeast and around the country. Dana Bowen is the principal consultant and the noise expert with HMMH. Dana was the technical lead for the type 2 noise analysis.
Well, good evening, everyone. Before we get into the presentation tonight, I'm going to briefly go over some housekeeping items, so bear with me. DOT has provided some tools and some resources to engage with the project team tonight and during the rest of the project. So if you have any questions during the webinar, we ask that you put them in the Zoom question and answer box. If you find that you didn't have time to ask your question, or if you think of a question later, you can always submit questions via email at the DOT email address for the project, which is CTDOT type 2 noise at ct.gov. There's also a web page for more information about the project, and the address for the web page is portal.ct.gov/type 2 noise. Next slide, please. If you'd like to use the captions or subtitles feature in Zoom, you can turn this on by selecting the Show Captions or the CC button at the bottom of your screen. This will turn on the captioning feature. Then you just choose the language by selecting the settings wheel next to the CC button, select captions or subtitles, and then select the desired language. These are the directions on where to find the Zoom question and answer box. So like I mentioned earlier, we would appreciate that any questions you have during the presentation go into the Q&A field, and then we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. For those of you joining via phone, you can dial *9 during the question and answer section at the end of the webinar to raise and lower your hand if you have any questions for the project team. Here is the Connecticut DOT's Title VI notice, and I'll just read a summary of this. The Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, and national origin in accordance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Any person who believes she or he has been aggrieved by any unlawful discriminatory practice under Title VI may file a complaint with the Connecticut DOT. And there are directions on this slide outlining the procedure to file a Title VI complaint. Next slide, please. And then this slide also covers Title VI, but the words are in Spanish. And if you could just please leave this slide on the screen for a few seconds, that would be appreciated. Okay, next slide, please. So with those items out of the way, the focus of tonight's presentation is on highway traffic noise. And highway traffic noise is basically noise associated with vehicles traveling on our roadways and our highways. Highway traffic noise is influenced by a variety of factors, and those include traffic volume, traffic speed, the number of trucks on the highway, and other factors. Highway traffic noise can interfere with any outdoor activities, and it can also affect our ability to communicate without raising our voices when it's too loud. So the Federal Highway Administration has established noise criteria for different types of land uses. And those criteria help to identify areas where abatement of transportation noise is warranted. So Connecticut DOT undertook this study to establish a better understanding of highway noise across the state, and also to identify areas to prioritize for potential noise abatement measures. And those measures include things like construction of noise barriers. We call this a type 2 study because it considers noise abatement on existing highways, as opposed to a type 1 study, which is a noise study focused on the impact and abatement measures for either new highways or existing highways where other improvements are proposed. And type 1 study is typically done on a project-by-project basis. So in tonight's presentation, we're going to cover, starting out with some noise fundamentals, then we'll cover an analysis, the analysis that we did on the project, including some noise modeling. We'll then talk about the noise barrier prioritization process. And then finally, we'll go into some next steps in the process and open it up to any questions. So with that, I will now turn the slides over to Dana Bowen, who is going to give the technical portion of our presentation.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so first we want to start off by talking a little bit about fundamentals of noise. So sound is defined as pressure variations in air, water, or other similar mediums. Noise is defined as unwanted or unpleasant sound, and it's commonly expressed in units of decibels. The level of activity interference and annoyance depends on the loudness, the sound quality, and human attitude towards the sound. For the same noise, humans can barely detect a 3 decibel change in noise level. For example, if you have traffic noise at 67 dBA that increases to 70 dBA, that would be barely detectable. A 5 dB change in that same noise is considered to be clearly detectable. A 10 decibel change in noise level is perceived as twice as loud or twice as quiet as the starting noise level. The graphic on the screen on the left illustrates communication distances in noise environments. As shown on the graphic, for a noise environment creating 72 decibels of sound, 2 people would need to raise their voice to communicate effectively at a distance of only 3 feet apart. When that noise source is reduced by about 6 decibels, 2 people could stand 3 feet apart and communicate without raising their voices. If that noise source is reduced by another 6 decibels, those 2 people could double their distance apart to 6 feet and communicate effectively without raising their voices. The graphic on the right illustrates noise levels of some common sources of noise that most of us are familiar with. So how do we determine noise impacts? Well, the Federal Highway Administration regulates highway traffic noise under Title 23 of the United States Code of Federal Regulations, Part 772. And you'll hear us refer to that throughout the presentation as 23 CFR 772, which is also referred to as the Federal Highway Traffic Noise Regulation. Under 23 CFR 772, Federal Highways establishes criteria for identifying noise impacts. These criteria are referred to as the noise abatement criteria, or the NAC. The NAC are developed for different land use types and human activities and are intended to strike a balance between what's desirable and what's feasible. Federal Highways requires that each state Department of Transportation or highway agency adopts those NAC and then defines impacts when traffic noise levels approach or exceed the NAC. Each state DOT is responsible for defining approach, and that definition must be at least 1 decibel less than the noise abatement criteria level. So Connecticut DOT defines approach as 1 dBA less than the NAC. For the type 2 noise analysis, the team identified existing highway noise impacts based on noise levels that approach or exceed the respective noise abatement criteria values for each land use category. The NAC values established by FHWA and adopted by the department are shown on the next slide. Okay, so this table on the screen here illustrates the Federal Highway Administration activity categories with their associated noise abatement criteria, values, and land use descriptions. So just to point out here, these are the noise abatement criteria. Therefore, the department considers impacts to occur when noise levels are 1 decibel less, so that approach criteria, than each NAC shown in this table. So for example, an impact to a category B land use would occur when noise levels are 66 dBA or greater. You'll notice that the evaluation location is primarily exterior, with the exception of some land uses for which Federal Highways has also developed an interior noise abatement criteria. We will discuss that further on some of the following slides, but primary consideration must be given to exterior areas of frequent human use. For the type 2 noise analysis, we focused on activity categories B through F. Activity category A is fairly uncommon, and it requires Federal Highway approval before an analysis on a category A land use is initiated. Activity category G was not considered for the type 2 noise analysis because those are undeveloped lands. On the following slides, we'd like to review the land use categories we did consider for the type 2 noise analysis. Okay, so this is FHWA activity category B. It's purely residential land use. It can be single family or multifamily with either common outdoor use areas such as pools, tennis courts, playgrounds and apartment complexes, or individual outdoor spaces such as balconies or patios. Activity category C represents recreational land use with outdoor use, and it includes locations such as parks and playgrounds, cemeteries, schools with outdoor use areas such as fields and playgrounds, as well as trails. The two examples shown on the screen include a park with a baseball field on the left and a school with outdoor use on the right. There's a playground and sports fields there. Activity category D represents the interior spaces of some of the category C land uses that we just talked about. It includes spaces such as churches, schools, and libraries that don't have outdoor use areas. Pursuant to 23 CFR 772, we are required to give primary consideration first to outdoor use if it exists. If we identify outdoor use, but it's not impacted either because of its location relative to the highway, or it's impacted, but it can't be mitigated, at that time, then we're required to evaluate the interior noise levels. The two examples shown on the screen for category D land use include a place of worship with no identified outdoor use areas, and then a hospital on the right with no outdoor use areas. Activity category E represents commercial type land use with outdoor use and includes hotels and motels with outdoor use areas only, and outdoor seating areas of restaurants and bars. So the two examples shown include a hotel with an outdoor pool and a restaurant with an outdoor seating area. It's important to note again that if these two facilities did not include outdoor use areas, they would not be evaluated for noise impact because there are land uses for which no interior noise abatement criteria are established. Category F represents land uses which are not considered noise sensitive by federal highways. This includes places like industrial facilities, airports, retail facilities, and other activity categories that have no outdoor use and are not included in the activity category D land use description. The two examples shown include a fire station which is emergency services, and then a retail store on the right. Okay, so now I'd like to get into the details of the analysis. So what is a type 2 noise analysis? Federal highways revised their federal traffic noise regulation to allow for the control of noise along existing highways. Noise abatement that's constructed along existing highways is defined by federal highways as a type 2 project. Type 2 projects are not permitted on roadways that are already scheduled for a type 1 project or on roadways where a type 1 project has already been conducted. A type 1 project in general is one in which there are roadway modifications, whereas a type 2 project does not include roadway modifications. To implement a type 2 project, a state first needs to conduct an analysis to identify locations of existing highway noise impacts. The intent is to then use the results of the noise analysis to identify a priority list of type 2 project locations. The priority list, as well as available funding and FHWA approval of the priority list, is required to then initiate a type 2 program. FHWA does not require the development and implementation of a type 2 program. It's a strictly optional decision by a state to identify and address existing highway noise issues. Anna?
So here we see a timeline of the history of the type 2 program for Connecticut. A study was conducted in the 70s. The state was then able to move forward and implement a type 2 program. This previous program was suspended in the mid-80s due to funding. Then with new legislation that was passed, it reopened the program for a few more years. It was then suspended a final time due to lack of funding. This program is now outdated, which leads us to today, presenting on the new updated analysis the department conducted.
Okay, so the department provided the consultant team with a list of 38 principal arterial highways to be included in the type 2 noise analysis. Principal arterials are generally roadways that serve through traffic and they have limited access. The list is generally comprised of limited access highways where highway traffic noise abatement could potentially be constructed. Local roads with numerous access driveways makes an effective noise barrier very difficult to construct because of the frequent gaps necessary to maintain access. A noise wall needs to be continuous to effectively reduce noise levels. The next slide provides a graphic demonstrating noise barrier length requirements to help understand. As a general rule of thumb, we like to say that to provide sufficient noise level reductions for receivers, a noise barrier should extend at least 4 times the distance between the last receiver and the noise barrier. That's just a general rule of thumb. You can think of noise barriers with multiple gaps for access driveways as short barriers that are not long enough to sufficiently block the highway noise. So let's get into the noise modeling. Noise modeling was performed to evaluate existing highway noise impacts, as we said. And as we'll explain in the next few slides, the statewide noise modeling is preliminary and simplistic. Specifically, the model does not account for changes in terrain, shielding from natural sources like hills and man-made sources like buildings. Standard lane widths of 12 feet per lane were assumed, and all lanes in a single travel direction were modeled as one roadway with a roadway width equal to 12 feet times the number of lanes. It's also important to note that this simplistic modeling approach was taken due to the statewide scale of the project. Each site identified on the type 2 priority list will still need to undergo a more rigorous noise analysis. Okay, so how did we categorize all the land use? Parcel-specific land use information was obtained from the Connecticut Office of Policy and Management for roughly 75,000 parcels. The OPM data comes from individual municipalities through the regional councils of governments. Because of all those data sources, it's not uniform in the type of information provided and how it's organized. So the project team resolved the inconsistencies and missing data through coordination with the COGS and individual municipalities. Land use was then categorized into those FHWA activity categories that we discussed in the earlier slides. However, we also visually inspected land use on aerial maps and street view imagery to confirm land use types and appropriate FHWA activity categories. The graphic on the screen illustrates a location along I-95 in West Haven, Connecticut that includes category B, C, E, F, and G land use. Again, we didn't evaluate category G for impacts, but we needed to identify those land uses to remove them from consideration. So noise measurements were conducted in a total of 36 locations in the type 2 noise analysis areas. Locations selected for monitoring are intended to represent a good sample of the entire noise analysis area, covering a range of different roadway types and source receptor geometries. The intent of the noise measurements was not to identify existing noise levels everywhere, but rather to obtain sufficient information to create a simplified or valid flat earth noise model approach and confirm that this flat earth model had an appropriate degree of accuracy so that it could be used to then identify existing highway traffic noise levels at all noise sensitive land use within the type 2 noise analysis area. A flat earth model assumes that the roadway and noise sensitive land use are all at the same elevation and that there's no objects to block the view from the noise sensitive land use to the highway. So some of the geometries represented by the selected measurement sites include depressed roadways, elevated roadways, and at-grade roadways. The graphic in the upper left is an example of a depressed roadway. As you can see, the roadway is lower than the noise-sensitive land use. You can see here at the top of the hill. The graphic in the upper right is of an elevated roadway. As you can see, the roadway is higher than the noise-sensitive land use below. The bottom graphic illustrates an at-grade roadway, where the roadway and the noise-sensitive land use are at the same elevation or level. One is not higher or lower than the other. So to help validate our flat earth approach, traffic volumes and vehicle classifications were counted during our noise measurements. The flat earth model included bidirectional roadway center lines and bidirectional traffic volumes classified by vehicle type, as well as posted speed limits. The vehicle types used in the traffic noise model include 5 types. We have autos, medium trucks, heavy trucks, buses, and motorcycles. The chart on the left shows Federal Highway's 13 vehicle classifications, and the table on the right summarizes the 5 noise model vehicle categories and Federal Highway's vehicle classes that comprise each of those categories. So for example, the autos category in our model includes sedans and pickup trucks. So those are classes 2 and 3. Whereas medium trucks are vehicles such as FedEx or UPS vehicles, as well as pickup trucks with the extra set of back wheels like dually pickups. Those are class 5. Heavy trucks are tractor trailers and other trucks with 3 or more axles, which includes classes 6 through 13. Buses can include commuter buses and school buses, which are class 4, and then motorcycles are class 1. So in the model, we used 2019 or pre-pandemic traffic volumes. The graph here on the screen is from the department's website on the traffic monitoring count data, volume and classification information page. The red line represents 2019 average daily traffic for comparison. The graph shows how traffic volumes sharply decreased once stay-at-home orders went into effect in March 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, modeling 2019 traffic volumes is considered conservative because more volume traveling at the posted speed limits, which is what we modeled by using the 2019 traffic, results in higher noise levels than less volume traveling at the posted speed limits. The traffic data input to the model was then used to identify parcels where existing noise levels approach or exceed the applicable noise abatement criteria for the land use activity categories evaluated, which again were categories B through F. Noise contours were developed within 500 feet from the edge of travel in accordance with Connecticut Department of Transportation policy. Contours are only used for planning purposes. If and when funding is secured, detailed noise modeling will be conducted and contours will not be used to determine impacts. They're used for planning purposes only. The figure illustrates the category B and C NAC contour and the category E NAC contour for an area along I-95 in West Haven, Connecticut. If you can see, the thinner orange line shows that department's approach criteria that we said earlier is within 1 decibel or 1 decibel less than the noise abatement criteria. And then the thicker line represents the actual noise abatement criteria. So what kind of abatement did we consider? Once impacts are determined, the next step is to consider noise abatement. Noise abatement in the form of structural noise barriers or noise walls was primarily considered. Earthen berms are not typically constructed unless there's sufficient land area available or structural noise walls are not permitted, such as along the Merritt Parkway in Connecticut. The Merritt Parkway's guidelines prohibit the use of structural noise barriers. Okay, so federal highways requires noise abatement to be feasible and reasonable. Otherwise, it cannot be funded for construction. There are 2 types of feasibility. We have acoustic feasibility that considers the level of noise reduction achieved by the abatement measure at impacted receptors, and engineering feasibility, which addresses whether it's possible to design and construct the abatement measure. For example, are there utilities that cannot be relocated without significant cost implications? Are there access driveways that need to be maintained that would degrade the effectiveness of the noise barrier like we talked about earlier? Reasonableness evaluates how many receptors benefit. In other words, how many achieve a minimum established level of noise reduction, which Connecticut Department of Transportation has established to be 5 decibels. Reasonableness also evaluates the number of benefited receptors at which the abatement measure achieves the state's noise reduction design goal of 7 decibels or greater. Reasonableness includes soliciting viewpoints of benefited property owners, and it also includes determining the cost of the abatement measure per benefit. So in other words, noise abatement that exceeds the state's cost effectiveness index of $55,000 per benefited receptor cannot receive federal funds for construction. This cost is calculated based on a unit cost of materials of $60 per square foot. The consultant team reviewed the noise impact contours for each county to identify where there are existing highway noise impacts and where noise barriers and earthen berms could potentially meet the department's criteria we just reviewed. Initially, areas with sufficient density of noise-sensitive land use impacted were identified. For example, if in areas where there's 3 impacted homes, it's very difficult to meet the necessary feasibility and reasonableness criteria, especially that cost criterion. Noise barriers were then evaluated in 130 areas at 4 different heights, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, and 25 feet in each location. These 4 heights were selected because they represent a reasonable range in heights that allowed the team to determine if a feasible and reasonable noise wall could be achieved. Most noise walls are at least 10 feet high, and this minimum was logical for the flat earth model approach. Lower heights are typically only effective where there's elevated terrain between the highway and the receptor, and you could take advantage of some of that terrain and create a lower panel height. The team capped the height at 25 feet, knowing that barriers are less likely to be cost effective the higher they're constructed. And additional benefits are really no longer achieved for ground level first and second story outdoor use areas. The figure on the right illustrates a noise wall along I-95 in West Haven, Connecticut. The shading represents whether the receptor is impacted and benefited. That's shown in the light blue color. Impacted and achieves the noise reduction design goal of 7 decibels, which is in the darker blue color. Impacted but not benefited, which is in the orange and orange-red color. Benefited but not impacted in the green color, and not impacted or benefited, which is a grayish color. The number of benefited receptors, so those receiving 5 decibel reduction and those achieving the noise reduction design goal of 7 decibels, were tallied to evaluate the feasibility and reasonableness of each noise wall. All noise barriers that costs were calculated using the department's $60 per square foot unit cost, which again is only based on materials costs, to determine whether each height met the department's cost effectiveness index. The cost does not include other required project costs associated with the design and construction. So the federal traffic noise regulation requires prioritization of noise barrier areas that are identified. So to prioritize the barriers, the team developed an equation that considered the number of benefits, the date of development, the degree of impact, how much noise reduction could be achieved by the barrier, and the total barrier cost based on the department's unit cost of $60 per square foot. The equation considers the number of benefits achieved by the abatement measure, the percentage of development that predates the highway, the average predicted noise level at the receptors to be protected by the noise wall, the amount of noise level reduction the barrier provides, and the total item cost based on the department's policy. Once the priority index values were calculated, they were assigned to each area to develop the priority list. So before initiating a type 2 program, one major step in the process is to secure the funding. It's important to note that the department does not have a dedicated funding program at this time. Also, in order for type 2 barrier areas to be eligible for federal funding in Connecticut, 25% or more of the adjacent development protected by the barrier must predate the construction of the highway. If a proposed barrier does not meet this criterion, it's not eligible for federal funding. However, state funds could be allocated. There are currently no allocated funds for this program. There are 8 such barrier locations on the priority list that are not eligible for federal funding. This is the noise barrier our type 2 priority list that was developed based on the statewide type 2 noise analysis that we just went through. There are a total of 38 locations on the priority list. Again, 8 barrier areas shown with the asterisk are not eligible for federal funding because less than 25% of development protected by the barrier predates the highway. These barrier areas, again, could receive state funding if and when available. I'll just leave that up for a minute. Okay. So Anna will talk about the next steps.
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, next steps. So to initiate any of the projects on the priority list, the department first must secure funding sources. Once funding is available, the department noise policy must be updated to incorporate the type 2 policy to consistently and uniformly implement the type 2 program throughout the state. 23 CFR 772 requires that detailed type 1 style noise analysis are conducted for each project on the priority list in the type 2 program. Detailed noise analysis includes noise measurements to develop a project location specific valid noise model. The detailed noise model may include terrain features and shielding from structures where appropriate and traffic volumes and speeds. Noise abatement must then be evaluated using the department's criteria for feasibility and reasonableness. So I would like to thank everyone for your attention this evening. We really do appreciate you joining us. I know everyone's very busy and it's tough to get here in the evening, so we appreciate you being here. We do want to be respectful of everyone's time with that being said. So if there are any questions that we do not answer on the call, please utilize the email and phone number that are on the screen currently to submit your questions after this meeting ends. You may also utilize them to ask questions, after this meeting if they come to you. And thank you so much for listening to us and being here.
We've got just a couple of questions coming in right now. Give us just 1 second. Thank you.
So one of the questions that we got in was how much longer can we expect till it actually gets approved and built? So I just want to highlight again that at this time, we do not have an approved funding source. So the study was the first step for the department in determining where those locations were. And we're currently looking into the next steps, which is securing a funding source and then implementing a program that would be approved by FHWA.
There was another question about with all the massive work going on in Meriden, we don't qualify for the study. So if you've had a type 1 study done recently in your area, yes, you were excluded from the type 2 analysis. This type 2 statewide analysis was to evaluate those areas that were not evaluated already. If you've had a type 1 project in your area, you have been fortunate enough to receive a type 1, which is also a detailed noise analysis, like we were mentioning in the PowerPoint, which means your area has been evaluated, impacts have been identified, and your area has gone through the detailed analysis of meeting the department and the FHWA's regulations for feasibility and reasonableness.
And I see there's another question regarding the current status of securing fundings. Like I said, at this time, we don't have any secured funding, and we're having conversations right now about that.
There's been some very neighborhood specific questions coming in. So I just wanted to highlight, if you guys have neighborhood or address specific questions, please submit them to the email address. I would love to answer those. However, I can't answer them on this platform. I would like to, look into your area and get you very site specific information. So just go ahead and email me the type 2 email address, which is at the top of the screen, or feel free to use the phone number if that's easier for you, and go ahead and leave a voicemail of the information, including your information. So either I can call you back with the information or follow up with an email.
Another one of the questions that just came in was, how do we get updates on the noise barrier process? If you follow the project webpage that's currently up on the screen, it will lead you to the type 2, but that also has the overall noise program. So as things progress or as next steps or conversations are taken, it will be updated on that webpage. And at any time, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to submit them by email, and we could reach out and just provide you a more detailed update.
So we got another question that says, how do you prioritize the ones that were considered a priority based on how many are impacted or cost? So that's a great question. Both the number of impacts and the cost are factored into the equation. They just have different weightings in the equation.
Another question just came in. So how much longer can we expect till it actually gets approved and built? At this time, we don't have a schedule for implementation. The first step would be securing that funding, and then the next step would be creating a type 2 program that would be approved by FHWA, and how we would implement and the details that would go into the criteria for doing that full blown study like a type 1, like Anna was describing. And so at this time, we don't have a time frame for that.
I do see an attendee has their hand up. I do apologize if you are trying to come off of mute to ask a question. But if you could type it in, I apologize. I know you guys don't have the availability to turn on your mics, but I also don't know how to give you that right. So please utilize the questions chat, the phone number, or the email, and I will get back to you.
We have a couple of more questions coming in.
We've got another question. What can be done to regulate sources of noise like Jake breaks? I get this one a lot. You're not alone. So Jake breaks, unfortunately, I know they're loud on larger trucks. However, unfortunately, the DOT does not regulate vehicle noise. That is actually through the DMV.
DMV and
So
state
that would
police.
have to be, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say DMV and the state police enforce the Jake breaks. That's all the questions that we have at the moment, but we can stay on for a few more minutes just to see if any more come in or if you have anything else you would like us to respond to. And if you think of any questions that come in after we get off this webinar, feel free again to contact us by the email that's shown up on the screen.
On the website that is up on your screen right now, if you go there, you will be able to access the full report if that interests you. So there's a lot more detail than what we went into today. This was a very high level of how much work actually went into the statewide study. So if you are interested in seeing the actual full report, please visit that website, check it out. Take down the email address. It's also on the website though. So if you have follow-up questions after reading the report or anything, please reach out. I'd be more than happy to talk with you. Also, the website in the next few days will also be getting an interactive map that you guys will be able to use, as well as a fact sheet. So very exciting things coming to this website. So please jot it down, take a screenshot, and stay connected with us. Guess we'll hang out till like 7 o'clock, guys. There hasn't been any new questions. We'll give you guys a few more minutes. All right, thank you so much. They're just my support team now. You guys are done.